You are listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank, your partner in possible.
What's up, everybody? I'm BJ Kissel. This is KCSN Update, our daily Chiefs show and podcast here at KC Sports Network. Thanks for spending part of your day with us. Matt Miller from ESPN will join me here in just a few minutes to go through his stock up, stock down report. This time we're going to be doing it on the Jacksonville Jaguars, fresh off their historic comeback over the Chargers, outscoring them 31-3 over the final 32 minutes of that game. Normally we talk a little Chiefs stock up, stock down, obviously with the Chiefs having the bye. We're going to focus on their opponent in the Jags. But before we bring on Matt and do that, here's a quick word from our partner, DraftKings. The NFL playoff action continues. We're one step closer to Super Bowl 57. And for the divisional round, check out DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. New customers can bet just $5 and get $200 in free bets instantly. Plus, all new and existing customers can take a shot at an even bigger payout with DraftKings stepped-up same-game parlays. Boost your NFL winnings with each leg you add up to 100%. Chiefs are 8.5-point favorites on Saturday in this game against the Jags with an over-under of 51.5. Looking at some of the other games in the division round, Bills 4.5-point favorites over the Bengals, Cowboys 2.5-point favorites, and Eagles at 7. So I like the Chiefs in the over. It's pretty much my go-to anyway, taking the Chiefs and the over. I love action. But the Chiefs racked up nearly 500 yards of total offense the last time these teams played. You've got McCole Hardman back. First time we've got all of the offensive weapons, something we'll talk about with Matt here in just a little bit. But I'm thinking the Chiefs offense rolls on Saturday. Now download that DraftKings Sportsbook app. Use code KCSN. New customers can bet just $5 on the NFL divisional round and get $200 in free bets instantly. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook with code KCSN. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. All right, let's welcome on Matt Miller from ESPN. Matt, how goes it? How was your experience watching what turned out to be some pretty good football over the weekend?
Yeah, I can't complain. The thing is, as you know, it's my busy season now, so I promised my wife a getaway before things got really crazy, with the caveat that we're going to get out of town, but I have to watch football. So I don't think she realized how much of the weekend I was going to be, but still a good time, as you know, and I'm sure a lot of our weekly watchers know. I'm a 49ers fan, or grew up a 49ers fan, so that game was fun to watch. But I think, being local to the Kansas City area, all eyes were on Jacksonville. All eyes were on the Chargers. I had Chiefs fans texting me like, God, I don't want to have to play the Chargers. I hope the Jags can pull this off. I'm patting myself on the back just a little bit. I actually picked the Jags to win. And at halftime, I was like, I'm the dumbest person alive. And then the comeback was pretty sweet. But I think it's set up for, round two, which it's still crazy to me how long the playoffs are now. But round two is shaking up to be a lot of fun for the NFC and the AFC. I think we've got some really good matchups and some really good storylines too.
If you would have told me that the two AFC, if the Bills and the Bengals, if those two games had been settled by a total of 10 points, I would have thought you were crazy. I did not think those games were going to be that close.
Same.
And I know we'll get into it a little bit, I'm sure, but between Skylar Thompson and what he was able to do, and not that you look at the box score and thought that he had this fantastic game where he's throwing the ball all over the field, thought he did enough. I thought a lot of the guys around him, including his coaches, the playmakers that we've been talking about all year, kind of let him down. We're talking about top storylines and how to kind of break down that game, and then what Tyler Huntley was able to do and Jim Harbaugh on the Ravens, and just kind of changing up their offense. Was really surprising to see. And I don't know if it was as much the Dolphins and the Ravens doing well or the Bengals and the Bills not playing very well. It's like, where do you draw that line? And before we get into your stock up, stock down for the Jags, because this is pressing, because as a Chiefs fan watching that game, I know what the Bills are. I know what the Bengals, I should say, I know what the Bills can be. I know what the Bengals can be. That was not what we saw yesterday. Those are not teams that I'm going to say we're not worried about, because the Chiefs have to play well. But those aren't, we've said it all year, like those boogeymen where it's like, oh man, if we don't play our best game, there's no chance we're going to win. I didn't see that from either the Bills or the Bengals yesterday.
Yeah, not yesterday, but I think it's a slippery slope, because those teams both beat the Chiefs within the regular season and have a little bit of a track record of beating the Chiefs. So it's something that I think, have to worry about, because, we've said it with Kansas City. There was that stretch second half of the season where it was almost boring to watch them play, because they were playing down to bad teams, and we wanted to see them really, put the foot to the pedal, and they weren't. And I know the playoffs is a dangerous time to do that. We've talked about that a lot with Kansas City. But that's how I felt watching Buffalo, is like they were almost hungover from the emotion of what happened with DeMar Hamlin and now him being healthy, the emotion of, okay, like we thought we were the number 1 seed. We're not. There's a lot that kind of takes its toll on a team. And I think, the Bengals played better, but you would still expect them to handily beat a team without Lamar Jackson. On the other side, 6 weeks, the Ravens played without Lamar. They're comfortable playing without him. And that defense, like Lamar doesn't play defense, right? The defense
right.
is still really, really good. So I think, that matchup is obviously going to get all the cachet for this coming weekend, Saturday games.
Right.
It's going to be all about Cincinnati and Buffalo. And I think everyone's going to forget that Trevor Lawrence just led one of the greatest comebacks in NFL playoff history and has to take on the greatest quarterback in Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into these stock up, stock down, because I know what the first one is, and I'm excited to talk about it because I'm not going to push back, but I might have a different takeaway from watching that game than you did. But let's get into the stock up, stock down. Again, talking with ESPN's Matt Miller, breaking down the Jags a little bit and what he's seen from them, obviously in their win over the Chargers and that big comeback. But obviously, since the Chiefs faced them last back in Week 10, seems like they're a little bit different of a team. They've come together and playing a lot better than they did around that time. But Matt, the first guy that you've got for your stock up, their quarterback, Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, we could almost go stock down as well, because the first half, was 4 interceptions and just he didn't look like himself, honestly. And I was thinking, okay, the stage is a little bit too big. They're not ready yet. Second half, and you and I joke all the time about halftime adjustments and how they don't really exist, because you have like 10 minutes to get in there. A little bit longer in the playoffs, it feels like. But I think for Trevor to be able to put that aside, to put the first half aside, you hear all the cliches about a short memory and, moving on to the next play, the next series. He did that. And to have the second half that he had, leading a team back down 27-7 at halftime, to come back and win 31-30. And he played, close to flawless second half football. And I think with Trevor, obviously he was the number 1 pick in the draft. He was billed as the greatest prospect since, Andrew Luck, Peyton Manning, John Elway. How far back do you want to go? He was billed as the next great guy, really from the minute he got to Clemson. And I think we saw in the second half what he can be. I think the other side is in the first half, we kind of saw what he is sometimes. He's still a little bit reckless with the ball. So he is, though, a dynamic playmaker, BJ. Like we saw it in college. We've seen it in the NFL. He'll beat you with his legs. He can beat you with his arm. They have a ton of speed at wide receiver. Like, we all mocked the money they gave Christian Kirk and Zay Jones, like that. Those are your receivers. Well, they look pretty damn good on Saturday. 16 catches. They both got a touchdown. Evan Ingram is a problem at tight end for them as well. So I think the Jacksonville passing game is definitely a stock up right now.
Yeah, taking nothing away from the moments that we saw from Trevor Lawrence, and talked about this a little bit yesterday on Sunday Sound Off, and then when I watched the Jaguars play, what I took away wasn't even the second half when Trevor Lawrence and the offense was moving. I wasn't seeing Trevor Lawrence do a lot of what you're saying and like the playmaking. And maybe that's just, I've spent too much time watching Patrick Mahomes and I know what playmaking looks like.
Yeah.
But what I saw was him throwing a lot of curl, a lot of stop routes, and watching Christian Kirk or those over routes where Evan Ingram would catch it and be on the run. I saw a lot of yards after the catch. I saw a very impressive group of skill position players take some very simple type concepts or simple catches and make something out of them. And I went back and looked at the yards after the catch numbers. They weren't as high as I expected them to be, but I think it's mainly because we saw a lot of like the Kirk Cousins. He's throwing 3 yards shy of a first down stick, and all of a sudden those guys are getting upfield and making plays for him. It's taking nothing away from Trevor Lawrence, not saying he's a bad player or that I wasn't impressed, but the most impressive aspect in watching that was, man, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Evan Ingram, even Travis Etienne out of the backfield. Like, those guys made plays around him, and I think made his life and his job a little bit easier in that game. And he's a quarterback, so he's going to get credit.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I do think even that sets up well for Kansas City. The secondary is not known to be great at tackling. So that when you guys start to look at the matchup of, okay, well, we've got these wide receivers that are great after the catch or great at creating and finding separation, you got to be able to square up. You got, or they're going to make you pay after the catch. And so I think, you're going to look at Justin Reed and Juan Thornhill and be like, all right, like, we can't have one of those games where y'all don't want to tackle. Like this has to be, and it can't all be on L'Jarius Sneed, who's a great tackler, or Joshua Williams, who's a really good tackler. Like the entire secondary is going to have to come to play because, like you said, the scheme. I mean, you all know it. It's Doug Peterson. You've seen this scheme. It works though because of what these guys can do post catch.
Yeah, I think what gives me a little confidence is the best game that we've seen from the Chief safeties was the last game that they played against the Raiders. That was against the Raiders. That Week 18 game was the best game that we had seen from Justin Reed and Juan Thornhill together this season. And you talk about Christian Kirk and L'Jarius. Go ahead.
So maybe Juan's best game since his rookie year. Honestly. No. So, and it was a fantastic game. You're right.
That's what you want to see. And talking about L'Jarius Sneed and Christian Kirk, I don't think L'Jarius Sneed's going to be surprised by Christian Kirk. So what we saw in the last game is probably L'Jarius Sneed's worst game, definitely of the year. I don't know if his career, but Christian Kirk had over 100 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns in that game. And a couple of those little leak route kind of backside concepts are what burned him. And he's going to be ready. I mean, he's going to know they're going to be ready for those this time. But the one thing with Trevor Lawrence, and we talked about it with the Chiefs, and I think it's kind of comparing this group going into the playoffs compared to a year ago, is that a year ago we spent all year talking about the pass rush, not getting home and not getting enough pressure and not doing enough this. They fixed that. Brett Veach and company fixed that this offseason. Now they're near the top of the NFL. Talked about with Trevor Sikkema last week and his 3 key stats and what the Chiefs defensive line and how well they've played, being a top 5 defensive line unit this season. Like that's where the Chiefs are at. So getting pressure on Trevor Lawrence. When I went through the numbers, Trevor Lawrence, one of the fastest quarterbacks as far as time to attempt. He gets the ball out of his hand, but if you make him hold it, he does not do very well under pressure. He ranks 34th out of 39 qualified quarterbacks when under pressure. You don't have to blitz him. If they can get pressure with Chris Jones, Colin Saunders, George Karlaftis, Mike Dana, all those guys up front, and Trevor Lawrence will I don't want to say fall apart, but you can rattle him. And going on the road, knowing he's got to put up points, and he's going to be in Arrowhead staring at Patrick Mahomes across the field, there's going to be a lot put on a young quarterback that has shown that he can get rattled. And so that's where I kind of have
right.
And that's where I kind of have confidence. Like, listen, between Steve Spagnuolo's creativity and this is another thing, and I'm really curious to talk with Brett Coleman because he's so good with the X's and O's and he studies all this stuff, that there were a handful of times in that Jags-Chargers games where the Chargers were getting a completely free rusher that was not picked up in any kind of way. And I don't know if that's the offensive line, or I don't know if that's Trevor Lawrence just not setting the protections correctly, but you saw that, or at least I saw it a lot more than you would normally do in an NFL game to get a completely free rusher with a free lane towards the quarterback. That's got to have Steve Spagnuolo salivating as a guy that loves to blitz anyway.
Yeah, and we hadn't planned to go here, but here we are. I think even, the Jags offensive line is better than I expected it to be, especially when Cam Robinson got hurt. But Walker Little is someone that you'll see Jeff and Mitch Schwartz praise as a really good young player. I loved him coming out of Stanford. He was just hurt, but he has performed really well at left tackle for them. So it will be, Brandon Scherf on the interior. You're going to get matchups there with Chris Jones. It's a fun matchup. I don't want people to be like, oh my God, the Jags, we're gonna kill them. This is a playoff team for a reason, even in a not a great conference. Or division, excuse me, but they did win. They did win that game, and it's a team you definitely don't want to overlook.
No, for sure, and they can jump up and bite you. And looking at their you always start with a quarterback. Can they put up as many points? And the things that he's struggled with, I think, don't lend itself well to going into the environment that Arrowhead is going to be, even on a Saturday afternoon. And not the prime time matchup. It's playoffs. Chiefs are going to be ready, and they're getting all their weapons back. All right, let's move on to the next guy. I talked about Evan Ingram, Zay Jones, and Christian Kirk really impressed me in this game, but it was hard to watch the Chargers game and not come away really impressed also with their running back, Travis Etienne, who I know is a stock up for you as well.
Yeah, he's my number 2 stock up. You're right. It's what he does as a runner, as a receiver. We didn't see it as much as a receiver, but he's capable of that. So I think looking ahead to a matchup against Kansas City, it is that of, okay, what do you do with him? who do you assign to Travis Etienne basically? Because yes, in the run game, the Chiefs have been better. You guys have heard me praise Nick Bolton. Etienne's one of the fastest running backs in the entire NFL. So it's a little bit of a different gear that you're chasing out there. So I thought, again, against LA, their ability to still mix in the run while down 20 points says a lot about his big playability. And, this is his first season after missing his rookie year with injury. There's a ton of chemistry, obviously, because they played together in college, he and Trevor Lawrence. And I do think he's someone that will be trusted a lot more in the passing game against Kansas City because we talked about all the speed they have at receiver. They are going to spread you out. And I think Etienne is that guy that can be a matchup, not problem necessarily, but you're definitely identifying him early this week in meetings of, okay, what exactly do we do with a player like this?
Yeah, averaged 5.5 yards per carry, had 20 carries for 109 yards against the Chargers, had one catch for 12 yards, but if I remember correctly, that was in a big moment in which he caught that ball out of the backfield and made a play because it stood out to me because I'd already watched Evan Ingram run around. Evan Ingram made some money. I don't know how many other Chiefs fans did this or how many other NFL people did it. When he caught the over route and outran the DB, and I just assumed that it was a wide receiver, and they said Evan Ingram, I was like, oh God. So I looked up his contract. I don't know all the details of it. I don't know if he bet on himself, but he signed a 1-year, $9 million contract. Even just off of that game, Evan Ingram made himself some money by athletically showing that he can run away from defensive backs. There are offensive coordinators and play designers all over the NFL that were probably watching that game or watching the tape after, being like, I can find a role for this guy.
Right.
He's gonna get paid this offseason. Somebody's gonna give him some money.
He reminded you why he was a first round pick, and why there was so much excitement about what he could be. He's only 28 years old. He's still relatively young. So he's gonna get a nice little deal. But overall, major theme, the Jags offense has speed. Obviously, they're not on par with Kansas City's offense. No one is, but it's definitely a team that they're playing better than the last time we saw them play against Kansas City. So it's a team that I do think you have to be aware of, and say, okay, what are we matching up against here with all this speed they have? And we have seen struggles for Kansas City secondary. I'm not picking Jacksonville to win, not that crazy, but it will be a fun matchup, I think.
All right, before we move on to the other side of the ball and get your predictions for this game, we're going to take a quick break right now. All right, welcome back to KCSN Update. We're hanging out with ESPN's Matt Miller, getting his stock up, stock down on the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Chiefs' opponent, Saturday afternoon at 3:30 in the divisional round. That game at Arrowhead Stadium. All right, we've already talked through Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, and pretty much all the offensive weapons. We kind of took the conversation a lot of different places, but let's switch to the other side of the ball, Matt. And before we talk Andre Cisco, because we were talking before this, and I kind of forgot some of that storyline. So we're definitely going to talk Andre Cisco after this, because very curious the welcome that he gets at Arrowhead the first time he makes a play, and how Chiefs fans very good at remembering what happened the last time these two teams played. But one of the other stock ups that you've got is the Jaguars defensive line.
Yeah, BJ, the pass rush was good on Saturday against the Chargers. And as you and I talked about before we started filming this, is that an indictment on the Chargers offensive line, or is that, something where we want to praise Jacksonville? I will say this, the two key guys there, Josh Allen and Travon Walker. Travon Walker was the number 1 pick in the draft last year, coming out of Georgia for a reason. Josh Allen was a top, first round pick. I believe he was a top 16 pick when he was coming out of Kentucky. They're both phenomenal athletes, and they're going to present a lot of different problems. Josh Allen has length, incredible quickness. Travon Walker's the total package. I mean, it's strength, length, speed. He's got it all. And for a rookie, I think he had 2 or 3 quarterback hits on Saturday. They weren't able to sack Justin Herbert a ton, which it's hard to do, but they were definitely able to get hits and hurries, which affected the game a lot.
Yeah, I'm looking at the numbers right here from Pro Football Focus. Josh Allen finished the game against the Chargers with 7 quarterback pressures. Travon Walker had 5. Arden Key had 4. Roy Robertson Harris, that in watching that game was definitely a player that stood out. He had 3 pressures, and then Trey Herndon and then a few other guys had a couple of pressures, but they finished with 26 as a team. So they got after Justin Herbert quite a bit in that game.
Yeah, they did. And, Herbert he's a sturdy guy. He's a big player. He's hard to bring down. So we didn't see the huge sack numbers. But I think as we move this forward to Saturday's game against Kansas City, a big talking point all year has been the offensive line. Orlando Brown Jr.'s struggles early. He's played much better as of late. Andrew Wiley, I think, is an unsung hero on this team. But if you're looking at what he has struggled with, it can be those, stringy speed rushers, and that is definitely Josh Allen. So it will be an interesting matchup because they have, a wave of guys they can bring at you. As you mentioned, you rambled off, 7 or 8 names there who all got pressures and hurries. So they're going to bring, a lot of speed and a lot of length. And Mahomes is a magician at being able to string things out, right, and kind of extend the play almost to find those passing windows. But I think this is maybe a different level of speed than they've seen on the regular this year.
Yeah, it's going to sound so weird, and this is like, I don't know if it's the entitlement or however it is. Pressures don't bother me as much anymore because I spent all season talking with Trevor Sikkema, again, a Pro Football Focus. Matt and I've known Trevor quite a while, but every week we went over the numbers of, especially early in the season when the offensive line was struggling, that Patrick Mahomes was a top 5 most pressured quarterback in the NFL, but a bottom 5 sacked quarterback. Like, he was getting out of it because he's a magician in that kind of way. For me, it's not the pressures necessarily. It's the pressures leading to a bad decision or a forced throw. So it always goes back to turnovers for me. If the pressures lead to turnovers, that's fine. But pressures really get Mahomes outside the pocket. And that's where some of like the best off script, out of pocket type plays that he's making out of structure of the offense. So the pressures get him outside running around. That's not necessarily something the Jags want either. They want to contain him in the pocket as much as they can and keep him in there, keep him within the structure of a play. So I'm trying not to say like, I don't really care if you pressure our quarterback because he can make plays anyway. But there is some, like, as long as it doesn't lead to the turnovers. I think for me personally, if the Chiefs win the turnover battle, or at least don't lose it, I don't think that they will lose a game. I think they will win the Super Bowl if they have a positive, or at least don't lose the turnover battle, because we've seen that all year. And I don't think there's anybody out there playing, including the Bills or Bengals, well enough right now that if the Chiefs don't give them extra possessions, I don't think they can hang with Patrick Mahomes in this offense.
Yeah, and I think that the like you said, entitlement, whatever you want to call it, is that you guys know that you have a quarterback that's not going to do that. Like, if you're a Bills fan, you saw Josh Allen have 3 turnovers, and you're like, what the hell was that? Why does he do this sometimes? For all the greatness, there's still times where you're like, God, why is he trying to lose the game for us? With Mahomes, you really don't get those games. So it's a different level of comfort of, if he throws 2 picks, it's a shock, right? It just doesn't happen. No. So again, not to say the Jags are going to win this game, but if I were doing the advanced work this week for Kansas City, these are some of the things that we're focused on, at least.
All right, let's talk about that advanced work. And one of those things, at least for Chiefs fans, will be, Googling, going back and recalling all the storylines coming from this last game. And if you were worried about the Chiefs offense overlooking them, not being as fired up, all you have to do is watch a couple plays and a couple hits on Juju Smith-Schuster from Andre Cisco, the Jag safety in this game. I had remembered it, but kind of forgot until you had mentioned that all of a sudden it came back up like, oh yeah, that was this game where you had a Jag safety basically headhunting Juju, and I think Marquez Valdes-Scantling got the second one. Yeah. So in the second one, and you and I talked about this, it was the second one that bothered me more than the first one, even though the first one looked a lot worse. The second one, to me, the intent looked like to harm, whereas the first one, it was just one of those caught in a bad spot as far as where the safety is when that ball is released and what the safety is trying to do to play a physical sport. But I don't think Chiefs fans are going to forget what Andre Cisco did as we go into this game on Saturday.
Well, definitely not now that we've reminded them. So if you forgot, you're welcome. Get your signs ready. But I mean, we've seen this team in the past, BJ. I don't want to call it like petty necessarily, but they have targeted people when they need to quiet someone. We've seen it before. I wouldn't be surprised if the first pass is to Travis Kelce running right over Andre Cisco, just to set the tone a little bit. Cisco's a good player, and he played well against the Chargers. He is someone that you have to know where he's at on the field, because he can be a playmaker. I mean, he got an interception in that game we're talking about with the hard hits on the receivers. So he's someone you got to be aware of. But I do think we're probably going to see, the Chiefs are unique in their ability to manufacture a chip or a slight. I've already seen Tommy Townsend tweet like, "No one believes in us." Like, what the hell are you talking about? You're the favorite.
Dude, Georgia did that. I don't think that's a Chiefs thing. I think that's a players thing. Georgia came out afterwards like, you thought we were going to go
no one
6-6. I'm like, nobody thought you were going 6-6.
So I understand, when your punter's tweeting about the chip you guys have on your shoulder, it's definitely permeated through the locker room. So, but I think this is one of the weeks where you don't need the manufactured slights, because you have those two plays that I'm sure are going to get played on a loop this week.
Yeah. All right. Before we get into your predictions, do you have any stock downs? I noticed we went through some stock ups. Or anything else about the Jags and their performance, either over the Chargers or what we've seen from them recently, that you think is trending in the wrong direction?
Well, I just, with Trevor Lawrence, that first half, you can't forget that happened. Yeah. For all the greatness of the second half, the first half happened too, guys. And, not just on Trevor, but the defense gave up 27 points in the first half. So obviously goes without saying, but against Kansas City, you cannot afford to turn the ball over 4 times. You cannot afford to give up 27 points in the first half, because they actually know how to call a game in the second half, and they're not going to hand you the ball like the Chargers did when they, for some reason, decided to not run the football at all in the second half with a 20-point lead. So it's obvious, but the the Jags cannot play that way and expect to be anywhere close to Kansas City.
All right. Let's get Matt Miller's prediction again, hanging out with Matt Miller from ESPN on this episode of KCSN Update. Matt, how do you see the game playing out on Saturday afternoon between the Chiefs and Jags? Again, right now, and this will probably change, the line is 8. The Chiefs are favored by 8.5 points with an over-under of 51.5. It's the largest spread of any of the games this weekend, the 4 games, the 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday. But how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I'm weird about this. I want to see what the forecast is going to be, because as you all know, in January in Missouri, it could be 65 degrees or it could be a blizzard. So I think that will factor into obviously the overall points, but I think Kansas City wins somewhat easily. I think the 8.5 point spread shows that. I would not be surprised if this is a 10-point win, just because I think in the playoffs it comes down to your best players against their best players, coach against coach. And as much respect as I have for Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawrence is going to be a really good quarterback in the NFL. They just can't quite match up against Andy Reid and the staff that Kansas City has. And to have Patrick Mahomes, to have a Hall of Fame tight end, to have all the different weapons we've seen offensively. And I think if Jacksonville has a weakness defensively, it is their secondary. So I think Kansas City wins this one pretty easily and gets ready to find out on Sunday if they'll be traveling to Atlanta or hosting the Bengals.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that game here in a second, get some thoughts on the other matchups in the divisional round before we let you go. But one of the other things, we haven't talked about this player, and I'm going to personally talk about him, and it's going to be a little cathartic for me, I think, because I had a bet on Nick Bolton to lead the NFL in tackles and would have won about $1,000 had he led. And he finished second behind Olakun, number 23, the middle linebacker, who will be absolutely everywhere for the Jaguars. And watching their final regular season game and seeing how he played, and then seeing how he played last week against the Chargers, came away completely kind of like tipping my hat. Like, if somebody's going to lead the league over Nick Bolton, like, that dude was making plays all over the field for their defense. And that I was really impressed with the way the defense kind of led and responded. I don't know if I'm trying to take credit away from Trevor Lawrence in the offense, because a lot of it for me was yards after the catch, and a lot of, again, not Trevor Lawrence just running all over the place, making crazy plays. Again, maybe that's just the Patrick Mahomes side, but really taken back by the way that the Jags defense kind of, I would say, sparked it or continued that momentum that they had. And going back to the first matchup, and I understand the Jags are playing completely different now, but going back to week 10, Patrick Mahomes did not struggle the Chiefs offense did not struggle in any kind of way against the Jags in that game. Patrick Mahomes had over 330 yards passing with 4 touchdowns, but even in the running game, the Chiefs had 155 yards on the ground. They had almost 500 yards of total offense and turned the ball over 3 times and still won by 10 points pretty handily, being up 20-0 at one point in that game. So yeah, nothing from the Jags defense. Maybe the secondary that you're talking about really concerns me. And the big thing for me, other area, I know I'm rambling here a bit because you brought it up earlier as far as there was a stretch there that the Chiefs offense it was just kind of playing down to their opponent. And I also want to at least bring up the fact that McCole Hardman hasn't played since like week 9 for the Chiefs. And we talked about it when Kadarius Toney and McCole Hardman were both out, that there's a chunk of Andy Reid's playbook with the jet sweeps, the ghost action, a lot of that pre-snap motion stuff that he likes to do to get guys going horizontally. There was a lot of that stuff that the Chiefs just did not have in their arsenal. They tried running it with Sky Moore, but Sky Moore, as good as he could be down the road, athletically doesn't threaten a defense horizontally in the same way that McCole Hardman or Kadarius Toney do, running that same kind of way. So this game on Saturday will be just the second time this season that the Chiefs offense, all of those guys are available. The only other game in which McCole Hardman and Kadarius Toney were both active was the Titans game. And Kadarius Toney had only been with the Chiefs for like 3 days at that time. So the Chiefs offense, Andy Reid, they're going to have their entire playbook. So is it inspired as the Jags defense was playing? I think there's just too much of the Chiefs offense in this game that could kind of be unleashed in kind of a way, and they're going to be locked in, ready to go. And I think honestly, the Andre Cisco stuff that we just talked about could be another reason to keep those guys just a little bit extra locked in, because everybody's eyes are going to be on what's going on between the Bengals and Bills. And that's what I want to ask you about now, Matt, is how do you see that game playing out between the Bills and the Bengals?
It's such a tough one. And obviously, I do think the game being in Buffalo is a difference maker. And the way the NFL came about that decision, you can argue it if you want. Maybe there should be another coin flip. I don't know. But I think that is the difference. So I think Buffalo wins a very, very close game. But I'm not convicted about that, BJ. I don't know if you are either. It feels like it truly could go either way. I think they're incredibly well matched up against each other. I mean, I have so much respect for what both quarterbacks are able to do, what both offenses are able to do. But I haven't seen the line on that one yet. I imagine it's really close, and I'll take Buffalo, but by like 3. Yeah,
I think it's 4.5, and that line will likely change. But Bills are favored by 4.5 right now, and I kind of like the Bengals in this game. The Bills put so much on Josh Allen that for the Bengals, I think it's Joe Mixon. I think the Achilles heel for the Bills this year had been the run defense, and the Bengals can run the football. Joe Mixon, Samaje Perine, those guys can get after it in the running game. I think that could be a difference maker. And it's the emotional toll that the DeMar Hamlin stuff. I think we saw it in the Bills last game. I think when the Bengals come back, knowing that game's going to be in Buffalo, it's a lot for the Bills to have to overcome, and you want to believe and all that stuff, but that stuff's very real. And being able to weigh on these guys. And I can't imagine they go into this game against that same team just a few weeks after this happened and not have them that weigh on them in some kind of way. But to me, Joe Mixon is going to be the guy that makes the difference of what happens in this game. If he has a good game, I don't think the Bengals will lose.
Yeah, and that offensive line for Cincinnati is probably my biggest question mark because, we saw Jonah Williams go down on Sunday night.
That's true.
There's a question there. And
good point.
Yes, Buffalo doesn't have Von Miller. They haven't missed him. I don't know. Guys like Boogie Basham, AJ Epinesa have stepped up. Gregory Rousseau, they've really filled in with, a great rotation of guys. So I think if, like you said, if Mixon plays well, yes, absolutely, Cincinnati can win because they're probably dictating tempo. If they have to throw to win, that's where I'm going to get worried because the offensive line is just as bad as it was last year. It might be worse right now because of injuries.
Yeah, not great for them. All right, let's switch to the NFC side. Get your thoughts on those two games. I know one of the matchups isn't settled yet, but talk about your Niners. We saw from the New York Giants, and I don't know if I saw any. I know there were people that picked the Vikings to win that game. I'm sure there were, but everyone that I saw on social media was picking the Giants to win. So I wouldn't necessarily consider that game an upset, but how do you see it playing out on the NFC side?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see who San Francisco plays. I just don't trust Dallas's offense right now. Maybe they can fix that in the postseason. That doesn't happen very often, right? But I guess we'll see Monday night what shakes out there with Tampa. I don't think you can ever bet against Tom Brady. We've all seen it, even when they limp through the regular season, it's, that ability to turn it on. They kind of did that last year as well. And, we're a drive away from being back in the Super Bowl. So I'd like that. The Giants-Eagles game's going to be a lot of fun just because, we're seeing just like Kansas City and the Chargers third time this year. So I think Philly beats New York. I love Brian Dable. Daniel Jones' redemption story is one of the best in the NFL this year. But I think Philly's just too good. And that game being in Philly is going to be a difference maker. I'm probably very biased, but I think the Niners defense is too good for either Dallas or Tampa. So it's boring, but I have a feeling we're going to see the top two seeds from the NFC in the championship game.
One of the things I want to ask you about and talking about the Niners specifically, because I've spent a lot of time looking up the number right now because I want to make sure that it's up to date. We've spent a lot of time talking about Frank Clark in the postseason and that he is fifth in NFL history in postseason sacks at 11 postseason sacks. And I think he was Bruce Smith was the all-time leader, or excuse me.
That sounds right because he played forever. So he's definitely.
Excuse me, Willie McGinnis has the all-time sack record. So yeah, Frank Clark has got 11 sacks. He's tied with a number of guys above Frank Clark on the NFL postseason sacks record. Reggie White, that guy. Frank Clark gets one more sack. He's going to tie Reggie White for fourth most. Then it's Terrell Suggs with 12.5. Then Bruce Smith with 14.5. Then Willie McGinnis with 16. And I use these numbers, talk about what Frank Clark has done in crunch time and that he goes and has 2 or 3 sacks in the playoffs this year. If he gets 3.5 sacks, he could be tied for second most sacks in NFL postseason history. I mean, 5.5 isn't completely out of the question in 3 games. Obviously, that's him really stepping up. We've seen it before.
We've seen it.
But there's a path in which Frank Clark could have more sacks than any other player in the history of the game in the postseason after a 3-game stretch if the Chiefs can get through all 3 of those games.
Yeah.
But you know what's more surprising than that? Nick Bosa, 2 years in the playoffs, I believe. He already has 8 postseason sacks.
Yeah,
and that was before their last game in the wild card round against the Seahawks. And I'm pretty sure he had at least 1 sack in that game. Looking at it now. No, excuse me, did not finish with a sack. So he's still
he had the fumble
down
recovery
there.
That was huge. Yeah.
Yeah. So he is only a few games away. They make the playoffs a few more years. Like Nick Bosa will ultimately get that record if the Niners can stay good and get back into the playoffs consistently.
Yeah. Yeah. And Charles Omenihu opposite him. I'm going to be a Texas homer. Yeah. Charles is a free agent. He had 2 sacks of Geno Smith. 1 was the forced fumble. Charles is going to get paid. I think a lot of people forget the Niners traded for him. They traded a 6th-round pick for him last season, and he's been very, very good for them. So that's definitely, as you guys have probably a month before you worry about free agency. For the rest of us, though, Charles Omenihu, some of the definitely has made himself some money.
We can't even stop thinking about the draft heading out to the East-West Shrine Bowl next week while we're covering, hopefully, the Chiefs getting ready for an AFC title game. We'll see where that game is at, whether it's down in Atlanta or whether it's against the Bengals at Arrowhead. But it'll be something to watch for. That again, appreciate Matt Miller from ESPN for stopping by with his stock up, stock down report. Appreciate everybody out there for listening. We'll have plenty of more content this week at KC Sports Network. So make sure to follow, like, and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcasting platform. And don't forget, we've also got all of your favorite colleges covered, whether you're a KU, K-State, or Mizzou fan. Big game tomorrow night between KU and K-State in basketball there at the Octagon of Doom in Manhattan. Make sure to check out the 3 Maw Show and Ain't No Seats. Got a little KU and K-State basketball podcast here on the network. But appreciate everybody for hanging out. We'll see y'all next time.